Greetings from the cosmic horrors. The stars are right, allowing us to talk about our favorite subject for a brief time. Welcome to the pilot episode of 30 Minutes of H.P. Lovecraft. I'm your cosmic host, Mark Griffin, executive of the Lovecraft estate on Yawgoth, joined in by two from the material world, David Guppy, a professor at Miskatonic University, and Richard Wilson, a chief supervisor of the 2002 English translation of the Necronomicon. Occasional denizens from other realms may pop up. If you see Princess Cthulhu, do not draw her attention, no matter how sweet or innocent she may act. Since this is the pilot, I will begin at the beginning, the Master Scribe's early years, particularly his relationship with a particular person who played a major role in piloting his own life. Lovecraft was born August 20th, 1890, which would make him 130 years old in 2020. He only lived 46 of those years on the earth. His birthplace was at 454 Angel Street, of all things, in Providence, Rhode Island, described as a big, rambling, three-story clapboard house with 15 rooms. The library consists of 2,000 books, some of them centuries old. It was torn down in 1961. Lovecraft may have been born in the house on Angel Street, but he and his mother, Susie, didn't come to live there until he was 3 years old. His father, Winfrey Scott Lovecraft, a traveling salesman, suffered a psychotic episode at a Chicago hotel and was committed to the Butler Hospital in Providence. Winfrey died 5 years later to what is generally called general paresia, a severe neuropsychiatric disorder usually associated with syphilis, an apparent job hazard associated with Lovecraft's father. H.P. Lovecraft grew up in this house, where his overprotective mother pampered him. Lovecraft described his mother as touch me not, indicating that he didn't always have an affectionate relationship with her, and probably with her husband too. She may have possessed a Puritan view towards sex. Women in the New England era of this time usually knew nothing about intercourse until the day of their marriage and came to view it as a bestial act to be avoided at all cost, which may explain why Lovecraft was an only child and why she didn't contract syphilis. She may have passed on her beliefs onto her son. The house belonged to Whipple Van Buren Phillips, Lovecraft's grandfather. His mother's father, Whipple Van Buren Phillips, was born 20 miles away in the township of Foster on November 22, 1833. He was an orphan when he was 13. His father was killed when his coattails were caught in the machinery of his corn grissing mill. How his mother died is not known, but she died in 1848, the same year as his father, and sometime before him. In his 20s, Phillips moved to Dove-Van, Illinois, a temperance town founded by Lovecraft's ancestors, to work on an uncle's farm for at least a year. He married Robbie Place, 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 in 1856, and they sired 5 children, 4 of which survived into adulthood. In 1859, the Phillips moved back to Rhode Island to a place with a macabre name, Coffin's Corner, which came from the Coffins family, who came from Nantucket to settle here. The town was created originally as a camp for the railroad company with its own intriguing name, Hartford, Providence, and Fishkill. Fishkill is a town in New York. The name comes from a corruption of how the Dutch pronounce fish stream. The railroad was vital to the farmers to send their produce and milk to Providence, and the camp boomed into a town. In the township of Coffin's Corner, Whipple Van Buren Phillips, I do love saying that name, became a successful businessman running a general store and a sawmill and dealing in real estate, buying up most of the land here. He must have felt that the town's name might scare away potential buyers, so he changed the name of the town to Greene in honor of Nathaniel Greene, a general in the American Revolution. As a prominent member of this town, Phillips served as a postmaster and state representative and founded the Free Ionic Lodge number 28, which still stands today and is called Whipple's Hall. He may have been thinking about how his father died because he invented a fringe trimming machine that he profited from. Whipple Van Buren was definitely a self-made man. When financial hardship hit him personally, he was able to recover and chose to leave Greene to move to Providence. At this new location, his fabled home on 454 Angel Street was built. He engaged in many enterprises that went beyond Rhode Island, such as his land deals in Idaho, where he christened the name of Grand View. He was successful enough to travel to Europe and fell in love with Italy, bringing back many souvenirs for his home. He was described as a large, stout man with a big white Walrus mustache. In 1889, He started a company to build a dam over the Brunei River, which may have been in the back of Lovecraft's mind when he wrote Color of Outer Space. The dam washed away the next year, but was rebuilt, which caused Phillips' company to collapse. This was a financial setback that he couldn't recover from. And this was the world that Lovecraft grew up in. His family raised him acting as if they were still affluent. Lovecraft grew up with the expectation, believing that he was the American equivalent of landed gentry. Whipple Van Buren Phillips is believed to be the basis for Mad Old Whatley in the Dunwich Horror, which, if you read the short story, would not be regarded as a flattering portrayal. But when Lovecraft spoke to his grandfather, it was always fondly. So we may not regard Dunwich Horror as being autobiographical, but instead Lovecraft using his family more as a template for the Whatleys. But that will be a discussion for a future time. Much like Old Whatley, his grandfather encouraged him in certain kinds of learning. Only Phillips focused more on classical literature and English poetry rather than the dark arts. Maybe. His grandfather did love weird and macabre fiction, such as the Gothic novels of Anne Radcliffe. She was the author of The Mysteries of Udolpho, an archetypical Gothic novel where a young woman loses her parents and must spend time in a gloomy castle. Edgar Allan Poe was influenced by her work, and another novelist, Paul Féval, turned her into a vampire hunter in his City of Vampires, The Incredible Adventures of Miss Anne Radcliffe. Two other favorite authors of Grandfather Phillips were Matthew Gregory Lewis, the author of The Monk, about the corruption and downfall of the monk Ambrosio by earthly and supernatural forces, and Charles Manchurian, whose Malmonth the Wanderer tells of a man who sold his soul to the devil. As a child, Lovecraft feared the dark. His grandfather taught him to overcome this phobia by taking him into unlit portions of the house. This desensitization succeeded so well that Lovecraft came to see the night as his time to be awake and move about. He became a haunter of the dark. We'll pause on looking at the shaping and molding of Lovecraft until, if the old gods wish, next month. For the rest of this pilot episode, Professor Guppy and Mr. Wilson will discuss more current Lovecraftian affairs. I turn it all to you now.
Okay. So, Richard, you translated the Necronomicon. Is that what I'm given to understand?
Yeah, that's a work in progress. It's a very weighty tome. We've got a team of translators working on it night and day.
Gotcha. Well, I think we had talked about Lovecraft kind of in pop culture and where he came from and how he got to the prominence, I guess that you would call it, that he's sort of enjoying today. What are your thoughts on some of those things, like the the beginnings of being basically an unknown writer and then sort of almost kind of blowing up in the last few years with all movies and references and TV shows and just all sorts of
pretty much every aspect of the media, because you get so many games, about when you're talking about tabletop or video games or RPGs, all that type of thing seem to be pretty much inescapable really at this point. Whole sections of, there's almost like a Lovecraft music subgenre really, because I was going to bring up when we're talking about influences, not necessarily modern, but say 60s, 70s, and 80s. You look at, say, like the work of Metallica, with a song very specifically, Call of Cthulhu, thing that should not be, ones that reference, specifically, or even taking verbatim words from Lovecraft stories and that type of thing. And that was seen as kind of an anomaly, I guess really at the time. But then now you've got whole sections of, say, bands, for instance, the great old ones, and ones that do nothing but every single song is something from the Cthulhu mythos or Lovecraft and that type of thing. Or for that matter, even get my prop out for today. You can read that.
Wow. That's awesome.
The Seussian H.P. Lovecraft's Call of Cthulhu for kids. So that's, and even written in like the Seuss style, as far as it has the rhymey, sing-songy patterns and that type of thing, and to it as well. But as far as I think that what you saw with Lovecraft in terms of not being very well known in his time versus posthumously, them having more of like a ripple effect where same way that musicians and other writers had that same type of effect in terms of, it would have been nice had their work been that popular when they were alive, for them. But then in this decades, it kind of snowballs, and that's what we're really kind of seeing with them in terms of there was a lot of his influence in what would you consider like subculture, counterculture stuff. Again, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, in music, in comics, in novels, that type of thing.
Right.
But even in then, you still had with mainstream writers, Stephen King, noting Lovecraft is a big influence on a lot of his, work and that type of thing. But I would certainly agree with you, yeah, that he's kind of inescapable as far as people that don't know anything about the source material will have a Cthulhu bumper sticker or some kind of, throwing some kind of meme around about that type of thing, just something they'll pick up through osmosis over the internet, that type of thing.
Right. Yeah, you can buy plushies of Cthulhu and all those other unmentionable, unnameable gods and so on. You were talking about the 60s. I mean, it's definitely been this slowly rising tide since the first time I'd even heard of Lovecraft was, like I said to you guys last week, was in the Deities and Demigods. And I was like, oh, well, that's really cool, and I started figuring out, where to find those stories, which was not easy to do back in like 1983.
Yeah, in the pre-internet where you had to actually dig to find
this
information.
There was the high school library. There was nothing there. I don't think there was much, if anything, in some of the local towns and their libraries. But yeah, there was. It was definitely it's definitely been an interesting thing to watch, especially being someone who's always read Lovecraft and sort of done. Even in college, I wrote a couple of papers about, Lovecraft and Poe and some things like that. And then seeing those exact same things slowly become more and more ingrained in some of the current, like I said, movies, TV shows, all of those things. And we're that sort of like the nerds of one, and here Lovecraft is here. And even if people don't know it, they're enjoying that stuff.
Yeah, it seems as far as certain anything from like comic books or to this, that, and the other all starts having kind of their moment in mainstream popularity, that type of thing. And it certainly would agree that at this point it seemed to be almost like saturation level. I wouldn't know how much more Lovecraft you could get than current levels of saturating, as you said, like music, games, movies, that type of things. In terms of everything now feeling the need to have some type of nod to the Lovecraft's mythos, in some manner or another.
Right.
Even working into things where it doesn't really seem to belong.
Awesome. Well, I don't know, I made some notes about things, as far as him being obscure, but he was critically reviewed by the Edmund Wilson, who was a sort of a famous critic of literature back in the 40s. And he said that the only horror he saw was the horror of the horror that were the stories that Lovecraft wrote. They were so bad, basically. But he did like his what is it called? The supernatural horror in fiction or in literature. He did like that. He thought that Lovecraft was actually a very good critic in his own right. And as I found today that evidently he had, I didn't know that, I'd never read this before, but Edmund Wilson had written a play, and he references Lovecraft in the play. And when L. Sprague de Camp say, hey, what's going on with that? He said, well, I've been reading all of Lovecraft's letters, and I think he had revised some of his opinions of maybe some of the works of Lovecraft by that time. So he sort of grew on people.
Right, where he turned his opinion around. I noticed some of that as well, because I'd read, there were people that were initially critical as far as it, then that kind of opinion would then kind of soften over time as far as, okay, or more of almost kind of like a mixed opinion of him, saying when he's very good, but then when he's bad, then it's, he's very bad. And those things, right, as far as ones that they think of his work that they found that, were very well done versus other ones that were, there's the big miss, that type of thing. Right. And that seems to almost like permeate a lot of the criticism there as far as with his work being seen as a mixed bag on various levels in terms of depending on what your criteria you would be using to critique it versus writing style versus the ideas that are coming across, that type of thing.
He definitely seems to have tapped into some collective unconscious, because people have just taken all that mechanistic universe and the unknowable nature of things and run with it. It's really interesting to see how all this is kind of blown up.
I think that, yeah, that you agree with that definitely. That's kind of like it taps into that vein of the fear of, you say, like a mummy or a vampire, that type of thing, versus the fear of the unknown, and then the almost the reader or viewer in instances of a movie or whatever is kind of, it's whatever the worst thing that they're able to come up with in their imagination is what's waiting for them, out in the darkness and that type of thing, and tapping into that collective fear of the unknown that everybody, can really fear, as opposed to something that's specific to, bugs or spiders or that type of thing that to certain people, that's not that scary.
Right. And it's also just the realization of the fact that nobody's, basically you're alone in the universe. We're a tiny speck in the universe,
right?
And the universe doesn't care a whit about us.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just here naked and open to whatever might come along. That's more powerful than us, or that we don't understand. The unknowable. I think that's kind of the basis of some of the horror that he is attributed with. And then you have like most of his protagonists, if you can call them that, become probably mentally unbalanced by the end of each story. They just can't handle the knowledge that they've now obtained. And it's just the fear of that completely unknown and what you don't see, but what you can imagine.
Right. Or like you're saying, as far as that these, that we are alone other than these forces that which either we're too insignificant for them to pay attention to us, or they see us as just as prey. Right. As far as to be consumed versus having any deep interest in our doings on Earth, as far as that type of thing. It's just like insignificant as far as that's concerned.
Absolutely.
I think that hits more of the, like you said, as far as particularly in modern times where we seem to have, there's no real undiscovered. Well, I mean, there still are, but to the layman, really, we've discovered everything, every corner of the earth. We know where everything is and all that type of thing. So, still tapping into that, there's still these things that are out there that you don't know anything about, waiting for you in the darkness. Then speaks, even more so now that for our parts of the country that humans don't go there, or we've never civilized that area. That now that we've, more to an extent, have civilized these, not necessarily civilized, to explore these areas, that it's still, again, these places where, and again, it's not even as far as the reaches of space. So much of Lovecraft stuff also gets into the deep sea and that type of thing, and all the various horrors waiting for you down there, which is more a terrestrial version, really, of, say, the cosmic horror, that something deep down in the ocean is similarly waiting for you, if you choose to venture down there.
Right. I think that's interesting that you mentioned cosmic horror, because that's a huge part of it. But there's also some more like body horror as well. People doing things to themselves, or ancient rituals to try to improve their situation, and they end up way worse off than they were before, if not dead. The kind of terminal climax that I call it in Lovecraft, where like the last paragraph is, and I hear them on the steps, they're coming, God help me, they're coming, and then it scrolls off the page. That's kind of
whose day is going to end well.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the end, the climax of the thing is the end. You're just done because the guy's probably dead or insane at that point. So there's tons of stuff that we can go into in future episodes, and other things to keep watching out for are like some new movies and shows coming out, like what is it? Lovecraft Country. Yeah, that's on the horizon. I think that's going to be an interesting take on the whole issue of racism and Lovecraft, and where that's going to go. And I'm really looking forward to seeing that when it comes out. I've read the novel. I don't know how closely it will follow that or not, but it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I need to get around to reading the actual novel before the HBO series airs, so that I can similarly be able to judge, whether or not they've established or adapted that, in a faithful manner, as well as the fact that it's being I've been meaning to get around to reading that as it was anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you have anything to add, Mark, to this? Or
I was just thinking about my first experience of seeing, experiencing Lovecraft. I'd always heard that name. The movies like Reanimator and From Beyond had just come out. You know, they said the based on the works of H.P. Lovecraft, and I was just kind of curious who he was. And but never could find his works until like one day I went to the bookstore, the old Walden bookstore in the Greenwood Mall, and there was a whole line of books by him. They had like his best of works, you know, one big volume, and then they had kind of some of his lesser known works in other books. And so I picked up the best of, you know, the first time and read that and just absolutely fell in love with it. And it kind of boggled my mind of his writing and all that. You know, his way with words just kind of amazing, but sometimes you kind of wondering, you know, where did he learn these words? You know, he had such a grasp on arcane language.
Oh yeah.
And also his curious British spelling for words. And so he kind of like stuck with you. And so after that, I got very fascinated with Lovecraft. And then there was another movie that came out called The Unnameable. And so I have it came about the right time for me because I was just reading all this stuff, and it's probably not one of the greatest works I've ever seen of Lovecraft, but it's definitely is an enjoyable movie, and I actually like the sequel as well.
Oh, I had no idea there was a sequel.
Yeah, they had two of them, and they're both worth watching. And so that was kind of my first experience of H.P. Lovecraft, and I thought I had read everything. Until recently when I picked up the biography of him and started to read during this pandemic and found out there are a lot more stuff of his that I didn't know existed, stuff that he had ghost wrote for people or revisions that basically became him ghost writing it. And so there's like a whole bunch of other works out there and little silly projects that he worked with other people. And because of all the stuff he wrote with amateur journals and usually under assumed names, we may never know everything he wrote.
yeah, I know he's very, you know, as far as what he wrote versus what was published under his name, there's a wide gap as far as that goes. I had no illusions that I'd ever read everything that he'd written, just because of the fact that, again, there's so many of those, you know, that again, where he may have written them in collaboration with someone else or under another name, that type of thing.
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff. And some projects that he ghost wrote on, he was more involved with others. Some he seemed like he wasn't interested in the story at all and only made like minor changes. And others, he almost like completely rewrote everything. And just let you know, the stars are aligned. And we'll need to wrap this up. And so I had to make the discussion for this for next month, if the gods allowed. 30 Minutes of H.P. Lovecraft was a creation in association with www.lovecraftpod.com and Logan Speculative Fiction Group with the help of the Logan County Public Library and the Great Old Ones. Until we meet again, may you avoid the wrath of the Cthulhu Princess.